Hey, and welcome on to NBA Recap. On the show today, we're going to be going through a little exercise, which shouldn't be too controversial at all. We're going to be ranking the greatest NBA players since Michael Jordan. That's right, the 20 greatest players since MJ, so from 1999 until now. So let's just get right into it. Okay, but really quick before we begin, just a few caveats and explanation on how we came up with this list and why. So first, right off the bat, this is not a subjective or opinion-based list. In fact, this list was specifically designed to have as little subjectivity as possible. There are no stats, no eye test. The only parameters that we used for this list were awards and achievements. In fact, there was 18 unique accolades that we used to assemble this list, and each was given a value. Then, every NBA player from 1999 until now were awarded points based on those accolades and their values, and then the players were just placed in descending order. And that was it. No subjectivity involved other than the values attributed to each accolade. Now, if you're interested, at the end of the episode, we'll break down explicitly which awards and achievements were used and what values they were given, and additionally, we'll break down the flaws of a system like this because, admittedly, it's not perfect. So stay tuned to the end if you want all the nitty-gritty details. But another caveat, the time frame. We wanted to answer the question, who are the greatest players since MJ? But how do you do that? Jordan's career ended once in 1993, then again in 1998, then a third time in 2003. So where do you draw the line? And do you count players who played alongside MJ in the 90s? So what we ended up doing is just drawing a distinct line in 1998 after the second retirement and the second three-peat, and basically we counted everything that happened in the league from 1999 onwards. So certain players' careers, like Tim Duncan, lined up basically perfectly. However, other players, like Shaq, had their career cut in half by this delineation. In the end, there weren't too many instances of players being ranked incorrectly because of this distinction. In fact, Shaq is actually the only player in the top 20 that might have moved up a little bit if his whole career was considered. But again, we wanted to adhere strictly to the idea of after Jordan, so we specifically used 1999 as the hard cutoff. Final caveat, what is, quote, greatness? This is an existential question for NBA fans and historians. Does greatest players mean the most skilled players or players who achieved the most? In this exercise, we're definitely leaning towards the latter. When you start comparing players' skill level and their potential, it starts to get very difficult to quantify very quickly. Do you use stats or the eye test? Do you penalize players for being on bad teams, or do you penalize players for not lifting their team out of mediocrity? What about longevity? How important are several decent seasons compared to one great season? These are all difficult questions to parse and can be argued justifiably one way or another. Therefore, we are just relying on the awards and accolades model to determine greatness, with an emphasis on achievements. Alright, so without further ado, at number 20 on our list of greatest players since Michael Jordan, we have the two-time reigning MVP, Nikola Jokic. At just 27 years old, he's the second youngest player on the list, and therefore he hasn't had as much time to rack up all the accolades and awards as some of the other players. He's only made 4 All-NBA teams and 4 All-Star teams, but the back-to-back MVPs just give him an edge to make the list. He will obviously continue to rise up the rankings as his career progresses. His silky smooth and exceedingly efficient jump shot, and of course his incredible passing vision and playmaking, are not predicated on athleticism, so his game should age gracefully. At number 19 on our list of best players since MJ, we have the San Antonio Spurs point guard, Tony Parker. The diminutive Frenchman was known for his lightning-quick speed and reliable mid-range jumper. But due to the Spurs' famously egalitarian system, Parker's stats were consistently a little underwhelming. Consequently, he only managed 6 All-Star teams and 4 All-NBA teams throughout his career. But, of course, he was an integral part of 4 of the Spurs championships, and was even Finals MVP in 2007. Not bad for the 28th pick in the draft. Incidentally, the only player on this list who was a lower draft pick was the aforementioned Nikola Jokic. But one player who wasn't a low draft pick was our 18th best player since Jordan, Allen Iverson. The number one pick in the famed 1996 draft class, Iverson delivered on all of his potential. Like Parker, he was small in stature, but unlike Parker, he has an absolutely stacked resume. 11-time All-Star, 7-time All-NBA, 4-time scoring champ, 2-time All-Star Game MVP, 1 Rookie of the Year, and 1 League MVP. He spent the majority of his career in Philadelphia. 2001 was his most prominent season. That was his MVP year, but it was also the year he led his team all the way to the finals, where they would ultimately lose to the Shaq and Kobe Lakers. But it was not for lack of effort on AI's part. He averaged an insane 35 points per game in that finals, including several iconic plays and 1 step over Tyronn Lue. Undoubtedly, Allen Iverson's flashy handles, gaudy scoring, and unmistakable swagger had an indelible, albeit perhaps outsized, influence on the NBA. At number 17 on our list of greatest NBA players since Michael Jordan, we have Jason Kidd. Originally drafted by the Mavericks, Kidd bounced around the league, moving to Phoenix, then New Jersey, then back to Dallas before ending his career for 1 season with the Knicks. But Kidd was probably at his most impactful in his stint with the Nets in the early 2000s. He was never the most efficient shooter, but he was a creative and willing playmaker, a solid rebounder for his position, and eventually he developed a reliable three-pointer. He was second in MVP voting in 2002, and he got to the finals in consecutive seasons 02 and 03, but lost both times. Eventually, though, he would get over the hump later in his career alongside Dirk Nowitzki in Dallas in 2011. Okay, moving on to number 16 on our list of best players post-MJ, we have the mercurial and divisive Russell Westbrook. If Jason Kidd was known as Mr. Triple-Double, Westbrook took that mantle and ran with it. He is currently the NBA's all-time leader in triple-doubles with 194. But NBA fans would be remiss if they thought Westbrook's career was just comprised of empty stats. He was an integral part of the short-lived but dominant Big Three in OKC, along with Kevin Durant and James Harden. Despite all being 23 or younger, they led the Thunder to the NBA Finals in 2012, where they ultimately were defeated by LeBron's Heat. By 2017, Durant and Harden were no longer in OKC. That's when Westbrook reached peak Westbrookiness. That season, he had an off-the-charts usage rate of 41%. He had numerous clutch shots and game-winning plays, and he incredibly averaged over 30 points, over 10 rebounds, and over 10 assists per game. The first time since Oscar Robertson in the 60s that a player averaged a triple-double for an entire season. And that was all ultimately enough for him to win MVP that year. At his peak, Westbrook's game was heavily dependent on his insane athleticism. He played like a bull in a china shop. He was at his best rampaging towards the rack and either drawing contact or kicking out to shooters. After finally moving on from OKC, he traveled to Houston, then Washington, and now Los Angeles. Things haven't exactly gone according to plan for Westbrook at any of those post-OKC stops, but with that being said, he's still only 33, so he might still have something left in the tank going forwards. Next up on our list of greatest players since Jordan, we have Dwight Howard. Drafted number 1 overall in 2004, Howard played 8 seasons with the Orlando Magic before bouncing around the league to numerous other teams. But throughout his stint with the Magic, Howard was completely dominant. He was the best defender in the league and the best traditional big man, and it wasn't particularly close. He won 3 consecutive Defensive Player of the Year awards in 2009, 2010, and 2011, and he was runner-up for MVP in 11 behind Derrick Rose, and he probably should have won that too. In 2009, he led the Magic to the finals where they would ultimately lose to the Lakers. But then later in his career, as more of a role player, he won a championship with the Lakers in the bubble, ironically in Orlando. Okay, next, we have Steve Nash as our number 14 greatest player since Jordan. The Canadian point guard played 18 seasons, primarily in Dallas and Phoenix. His most dominant stretch was clearly with the famed 7 seconds or less Suns of the mid and late 2000s. Alongside big man Amare Stoudemire and under the tutelage of offensive guru head coach Mike D'Antoni, Nash's Suns fundamentally changed the way basketball was played in the NBA with their up-tempo, high-octane offense, prioritizing the pick-and-roll, three-pointers, and transition offense over the slow and more methodical post-play and triangle-style offense that was dominating the league in the 90s and early 2000s. Individually, Nash was an incredibly efficient shooter and a creative and willing playmaker. If he'd been playing several years later, he might have scored even more as the three-pointer became more and more prominent in the NBA. Nonetheless, for his troubles, he earned back-to-back MVPs in 2005 and 2006. He was also runner-up for another MVP, a 7-time All-NBA and 8-time All-Star. At number 13 on our list of greatest players since MJ, we have Dwayne Wade. The Miami Heat shooting guard has an absolutely stacked resume. 13-time All-Star, 8-time All-NBA, 3-time champion, 3-time All-Defense, and the list goes on. He had 2 distinct stretches of dominance, which makes his career unique and totally elite. One came early in his career. When he was just 24, he led the Heat to a championship alongside Shaq, earning Finals MVP along the way and cementing himself early on as an all-time great player. But then, of course, it was his second, more famous run during the early 2010s when he recruited LeBron James and Chris Bosh to form the Heatles. Granted, their run fell a little bit short of certain lofty expectations, but they still managed 2 championships and 4 consecutive trips to the finals. Moving on to our number 12 greatest NBA player post-Jordan, we have Kawhi Leonard. Now, Kawhi's career thus far has been one of the more enigmatic of the guys on this list. Like Wade, Leonard has had distinct eras throughout his career. He started off in San Antonio, where he was the presumptive heir apparent to the Duncan dynasty. Early on, it looked like that plan was coming to fruition. Kawhi was a key part of the Spurs' back-to-back finals runs in 2013 and 2014. They lost in their first trip, but emphatically won the second, with Leonard leading the way, earning finals MVP at just 22 years old. He had quickly developed into one of the league's most terrifying defenders. He won back-to-back Defensive Player of the Years in 15 and 16. And his jump shot improved significantly from just okay to good to great. But then in 2017, his career took a turn with the infamous Zaza Pachulia step-under that injured Kawhi in the Western Conference Finals. He proceeded to miss the entire next season in acrimonious fashion, and since then he hasn't had a fully healthy season. The Spurs' frustration with Kawhi and his lack of communication during his rehab led to a blockbuster trade with Toronto for DeMar DeRozan, which was seen as a risky gamble at the time by Masai Ujiri. But it ended up being a masterstroke in the end, as the Raptors had instant success, winning the title in 2019 and earning Kawhi his second Finals MVP. Now he's with the Clippers alongside Paul George, and while injuries have thus far hampered this third iteration of Kawhi's career, it would seem foolhardy to bet against him at this point. Next up on our list of greatest players since MJ, we have the point god himself, Chris Paul. Another player whose career has had many distinct eras, CP3 has played in New Orleans, Los Angeles, Houston, OKC, and now Phoenix. Paul is the consummate point guard, leading the league in assists 5 times and steals 6 times. He's made 12 All-Star teams, 11 All-NBA teams, and 9 All-Defensive teams. He does it all on the court: elite playmaking, tenacious defense, vocal leadership, and clutch shot making. Unfortunately, though, Paul has struggled throughout his career to find consistent success in the playoffs. His stint alongside Blake Griffin in LA was marred by disappointment in the postseason, never making it past the second round in the competitive Western Conference. Then, in Houston, alongside James Harden, they were probably the second best team in the league for a couple of seasons, but CP3 once again was unable to get out of the West as they had the distinct displeasure of facing off against Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, and the Warriors' super team. It wasn't until he got to Phoenix at age 35 that he finally made it to the NBA Finals, where he ultimately lost again, this time to the Milwaukee Bucks. Nonetheless, this late career renaissance from Paul has been an absolute revelation. He was basically thrown away by the Rockets in their trade for Russell Westbrook, but in Phoenix, alongside Devin Booker, Paul has once again found his groove, and he's had several more incredible seasons. Moving on to number 10, where we find the second member of the original OKC Big Three, James Harden. Spoiler alert, the third member of that trio is still to come on this list. Anyways, Harden, like his former compatriot Westbrook, engenders a certain amount of derision and animosity, but that should not overshadow his immense impact on the league. Offensively, few players in the history of the NBA have been as dominant as the Beard. With his unique blend of strength and finesse, he could barrel into the lane and draw contact like few others in league history. Add to that his devastating patented step-back three-pointer and his elite court vision, and you get one of the greatest offensive basketball players, period. He led the league in scoring 3 times, assists once, was a 10-time All-Star, a 7-time All-NBA, and was a perennial MVP candidate during his stint in Houston. 1 third-place finish, 3 times runner-up, and 1-time winner. Of course, like CP3, Harden has also had his fair share of playoff foibles. His trip to the finals in 2012 with OKC was the only time he's made it that far. Since then, he's had numerous unceremonious postseason disappointments. But at age 32, like Westbrook, he still has time to write another chapter in his NBA story, especially now that he's in Philadelphia alongside another MVP candidate in Joel Embiid. Moving on to number 9 on our list of best NBA players since MJ, we have the Greek freak, Giannis Antetokounmpo. At just 27 years of age, Giannis is the youngest player on this list, and he's managed to rack up a Hall of Fame-worthy resume already, even though he's only played 9 seasons. The versatile point forward / center, whatever you want to call him, he is the epitome of the positionless modern era of NBA basketball. At 6'11", with a 7'3" wingspan, he can credibly guard all 5 positions on the court, and he has the hardware to prove it. 5 times All-Defense and 1-time Defensive Player of the Year in 2020. He's also won Most Improved Player, All-Star Game MVP, and 2 back-to-back MVPs in 2019 and 2020. He joined Hakeem Olajuwon and Michael Jordan as the only players in NBA history to win MVP and DPOY in the same year. So he's pretty much won everything under the sun in the NBA except for a title. That was until 2021, when he led the Bucks on a rampage through the playoffs with numerous iconic plays along the way, ultimately defeating the Phoenix Suns and averaging 35 points per game in the finals. He was obviously awarded Finals MVP for his troubles, which pretty much cemented his legacy already as an all-time great, not that it even needed any more cementing. So, with so much of his NBA career still ahead of him, and as the consensus best player on the planet right now, the sky's pretty much the limit for Giannis from here. We'll just have to wait and see how high he can continue to climb up the all-time rankings. Next up, we move on to number 8 on our list of great players post-Jordan, where we find the big ticket, Kevin Garnett. KG had just turned 19 years old. He was fresh out of high school when he was drafted by the Timberwolves in 1995. But it didn't take long for the power forward to start dominating in the NBA. He played 21 seasons in the league, and from 1999 onwards, remember that's our time frame for this exercise, he was a 13-time All-Star, a 9-time All-NBA, 12-time All-Defense, 1-time Defensive Player of the Year, 1-time champion, and 1-time MVP. And he was also second or third in MVP voting 3 other times. Not bad for a skinny high school kid from South Carolina. Garnett was with the Timberwolves until 2007. His teams got knocked out of the first round of the playoffs 7 times in a row from 97 to 2003. But in 2004, he carried his team to the Western Conference Finals, where they would ultimately be knocked out by the Lakers. But he would have his revenge 4 years later. After being traded to Boston and forming a super team alongside Paul Pierce and Ray Allen, KG finally won his ring in 2008, ultimately defeating the Lakers in the finals. The Celtics would make the finals again in 2010, but then they lost to the Lakers, and the rest of KG's career was a little bit less prolific. He eventually finished his career bouncing to Brooklyn and then finally back to Minnesota. Okay, at number 7 on our list of greatest players since Jordan, we have another all-time great power forward, Dirk Nowitzki. Drafted by the Mavericks in 1998, Dirk struggled to find his footing in the league early on. But after a few seasons, with some help from Steve Nash, the German big man started to become more and more dominant, especially offensively in the NBA. From his third season on, he rattled off 12 consecutive seasons, averaging over 20 points per game. In the end, he built an impressive resume. 14-time All-Star, 12-time All-NBA, he finished third in MVP voting twice and won it in 2007. He impressively led his teams to the playoffs without fail from 2001 all the way to 2012. He first reached the Western Conference Finals in 2003, but lost to the Spurs. Then in 2006, he led the Mavs all the way to the finals, where they were edged by Dwayne Wade and the Heat. But like we mentioned with Kevin Garnett getting his playoff revenge, as did Dirk. It wasn't until later in his career, though, at age 32, after doubts had consistently been raised about whether he could ever get over the hump in Dallas, that he led a savvy veteran group of Jason Kidd, Tyson Chandler, Sean Marion, and Jason Terry back to the finals. He was once again facing up against Dwayne Wade in the Miami Heat, although this time, Wade had backup with LeBron James and Chris Bosh alongside him. And yet, the Mavs prevailed, with Dirk finally securing his championship and earning Finals MVP along the way. That was Dirk's only ring, but he stayed with Dallas throughout the rest of his career. And in the end, he left an indelible mark on the league, obviously with his trademark mid-range fadeaway, but also extending to his reputation as a skillful European player, a moniker which at times in the past translated to soft. But Dirk's sustained dominance and resilience throughout his career was instrumental in redefining what it meant to be a European player in the NBA. Next up, at number 6 on our list of greatest NBA players since MJ, we have, the greatest shooter of all time, Stephen Curry. At this point, Steph needs no introduction. He single-handedly changed the game with his transcendent shooting, influencing generations of up-and-coming basketball players like no one else since, Michael Jordan. He's the centerpiece of one of the greatest dynasties in NBA history, and he's got all the accolades to back it up. 8-time All-Star, 8-time All-NBA, 2-time scoring champ, 4-time champion, 1-time Finals MVP, and 2-time League MVP. At 34 years old, his game is aging like fine wine, and he has plenty of time and the infrastructure around him to continue to add to his legacy. The only detriment for Curry is the longevity. He got a late start, playing 3 years at Davidson before declaring for the NBA draft, where he was infamously taken with the 7th pick after the likes of Johnny Flynn and Hasheem Thabeet. He also had a few seasons at the beginning of his career that were less impactful as he played alongside Monte Ellis. And finally, he's had a few seasons that were significantly impacted by injury. For all those reasons, his overall accolades are slightly fewer than the guy one spot ahead of him, his former teammate. But despite all of that, Curry's career and impact on the game writ large have truly been iconic and special. There are few sporting experiences quite like watching a flurry of three-pointers from Chef Curry. So, unsurprisingly, at number 5 on our list of post-Jordan greats, we have the aforementioned former teammate of Steph Curry, one Kevin Durant. Despite being 1 year younger than Steph, KD has 1 extra year of experience in the league after playing for just a single season at Texas. Consequently, he's had 14 seasons to rack up an impressive trophy cabinet. He's a 12-time All-Star, 10-time All-NBA, 4-time scoring champ, 2-time NBA champion, 2-time Finals MVP, and 1-time League MVP. Oh, and he was runner-up for MVP 3 separate times. Suffice it to say, KD has pretty much achieved everything you could achieve in the NBA and then some. If Curry is the greatest shooter ever, KD has a legit claim to be the greatest scoring forward of all time. His unique combination of length and incredibly efficient shooting, along with a serviceable handle, makes him virtually unstoppable offensively. And he's not bad on the other end of the ball in the slightest. But with all of that being said, KD still has some doubters and personal demons. After playing for 9 seasons with the Supersonics and Thunder, Durant famously or infamously joined forces with Curry in Golden State, forming one of the most dominant teams in NBA history. But some perceived that move to be, quote, the easy way out. KD seems to have been personally unfulfilled by his experience with the Warriors. Despite being the Finals MVP for both of their title-winning seasons and going toe-to-toe with LeBron James, Durant departed from the team in 2020 after their injury-riddled loss to the Raptors in 2019. Since then, he's been with the Nets, although it hasn't exactly been smooth sailing in Brooklyn for a variety of reasons. Now, in the 2022 season, rumors are swirling about a potential trade away from the Nets for KD. What does the future hold for one of the most talented offensive players the league has ever seen? We shall see, but it certainly doesn't take anything away from what he has done up to this point in an otherwise exemplary career. Alright, at number 4 on our list of greatest players since MJ, we have perhaps the most dominant, most unstoppable player on this list yet, Shaquille O'Neal. Now, it's important to point out right off the bat, Shaq's career, probably more than anyone else on this list, was compromised significantly by the time frame constraints that we used for this exercise. Remember, it's 1999 to 2022. We wanted to know who the greatest players after Jordan were, not necessarily the greatest players with and after Jordan. Unfortunately, some players' careers were inevitably going to be handicapped by this restraint, but it is what it is. Nonetheless, Shaq, despite missing about a third of his career prior to 1999, still came out at number 4 in our list. Granted, most of his top-end achievements did come after 1999 anyways. So, from 99 onwards, Shaq Diesel was a 9-time All-Star, 9-time All-NBA, 4-time champion, 3-time Finals MVP, 1-time MVP, 1-time MVP runner-up, and 2 times MVP third place. At this point in our list, you pretty much have to be a multiple-time champion and have significant other hardware to compete. And Shaq certainly does indeed. He obviously did a lot of that damage in the early 2000s, alongside Kobe Bryant on the Lakers. Their three-peat has gone down in NBA history as one of the most dominant runs ever. And the fact that Shaq was Finals MVP for all 3 of those titles is just the cherry on top. He was hands down the most dominant big man of his era, a truly unstoppable force down low. They literally had to change the rules of the game because of Shaq. His level of athleticism, considering his massive size, 7'1", 325 pounds, is unparalleled by anyone throughout the history of the league. A modern comparison for Shaq would be Zion Williamson, except that Shaq is 7 inches taller and 40 pounds heavier. And, importantly, Shaq was playing in an era that prioritized low-post play much more than we do now. Obviously, Shaq's Achilles heel was the free throw shooting, a career percentage of 53% that led to an entire strategy, Hack-a-Shaq, which still lives on today. But at the end of the day, that rarely slowed him down, and he went on after his years in LA to win another title in Miami alongside Dwayne Wade. And so, because we just had Shaq, it's only fitting that our number 3 greatest player since MJ is one Kobe Bryant. Perhaps the player who most emulated Jordan, Kobe was a phenom in the NBA. With the Lakers throughout his entire 20-year career, Kobe, more so than anyone on the list yet, has an absolutely stacked resume. As a fan favorite, he was selected to 18 All-Star games, tied for second most all-time behind just Kareem. He was also a 15-time All-NBA, 12-time All-Defense, 2-time scoring champ, 5-time champion, and 2-time Finals MVP. Oh, and he won an Academy Award in 2018, too, for good measure. He was also MVP runner-up once and third place 3 times. Kobe had elite athleticism, which he used to good measure on the defensive end, elite clutch scoring as well, and a truly elite will to win. Famously relentless and hard-working, he even spawned an entire movement, the Mamba mentality, which is still alive and well with many players today. Obviously, Kobe was alongside Shaq, leading the three-peat Lakers in the early 2000s. But then it was the late 2000s run that really cemented Kobe's legacy as an all-time great. After some ups and downs in the mid-2000s, the Lakers acquired Pau Gasol in 2008, which instantly revitalized their team into a legit title contender. They quickly made it back to the finals that year, but lost to the Celtics. But then in 09 and 10, Kobe led the Lakers to two consecutive more titles, both of which netted him finals MVPs. But the legacy and the legend of Kobe Bryant goes so far beyond the trophies and the accolades. From the 81-point game in 2006 against the Raptors, the second highest single-game scoring performance in NBA history behind just Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game in '62, to the final game of his career when he was 37 and a shell of himself athletically, but he still managed to go out in a blaze of glory, setting a league-wide season high in scoring with 60, which was the most by any player ever at that age. To the legions of adoring fans around the world that worship at the altar of Kobe Bean Bryant, many of whom got into the NBA or basketball writ large solely because of Kobe. Granted, he wasn't a perfect person off the court. He had a noteworthy incident of sexual assault in 2003 that was settled out of court. And granted, he wasn't always the perfect teammate either. Not unlike Michael Jordan himself, his on-court intensity and extreme work ethic had a tendency of rubbing certain teammates the wrong way, namely one Shaquille O'Neal. And, of course, his extremely tragic and untimely death in January of 2020 alongside his daughter Gianna puts a pall of sadness over any discussion of Kobe and his legacy. But none of that should ever tarnish or obscure the greatness that was the Laker legend, the Black Mamba, Kobe Bryant. Okay, just a couple more players left on our list of the greatest NBA players post-MJ. At number 2, we have the big fundamental, Tim Duncan. Now, right off the bat, let me just point out that the gap between Duncan and Kobe was extremely close. They both have completely stacked resumes, but in the end, Duncan just got the edge by a few points, and ultimately it came down to the top-end awards. Kobe had more All-Stars and All-NBAs, whereas Duncan performed better in the MVPs and the final MVPs scoring. So, Timmy, the San Antonio Spurs legend, who has gone down as the greatest power forward of all time, won the following throughout his illustrious 19-year career. 15 times All-Star, 15 times All-NBA, 15 times All-Defense, 5-time champion, 3-time Finals MVP, 2-time League MVP, as well as 2-time MVP runner-up, and 1-time MVP third place. Duncan pretty much did it all as a big man on the court. Elite defense, elite low-post scoring, elite leadership, and especially in his younger years, considering his size, elite athleticism as well. He came into the league and hit the ground running after spending a full 4 years in college at Wake Forest, which makes his 19 years in the NBA even more impressive. The Spurs won their first title in 1999 in Duncan's second season. He was only 22 years old, but he led the Spurs alongside his fellow Twin Tower, David Robinson, to a finals victory over the Knicks and earned his first finals MVP in the process. Then, after Shaq and Kobe's run with the Lakers in the early 2000s, Duncan's Spurs really dominated in the mid-2000s. They won 3 titles in 5 years, from '03 to '07, with Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker rounding out the Spurs' famous Big Three. It was after the '07 title, though, when doubts started to creep in about Duncan's career and longevity. He was already in his 30s at that point, and due to several small nagging injuries, had clearly lost a step athletically from his prime days in the early 2000s. But in the end, that was not a problem at all. In fact, his longevity is precisely why he is truly one of the NBA's all-time great players. Like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Duncan was able to maintain an incredible level of effectiveness into his mid and even late 30s. His scoring did dip quite a bit, but the defense, the basketball IQ, the leadership, all stayed elite. Duncan's final title came in 2014 at age 37. After the Spurs were devastatingly defeated by LeBron James and the Heat in the finals in 2013, they came storming back with a vengeance in 14 and dominated the playoffs, playing some beautiful basketball, with Timmy still providing the same fundamental low-post scoring and defense that he had for the previous 17 seasons. Duncan's consistency, longevity, and sustained dominance are best exemplified by the fact that the Spurs, throughout his 19-year tenure, never missed the playoffs and never had a losing record. And now, last but certainly not least, we have reached the number one greatest NBA player since Michael Jordan, and it should come as no surprise that it is one LeBron James. At this point in his career, LeBron has reached a level that only a few players throughout the history of the NBA have reached. He's in the conversation for greatest player of all time. Now, instead of delving into that rabbit hole of who is the greatest ever between Jordan or James or perhaps someone else, we have the luxury in this episode of focusing solely on the post-Jordan era of 1999 until now. And through that lens, it is absolutely unequivocally crystal clear that LeBron James is the greatest player since MJ. The stats, the awards, the achievements, everything backs that up. So first, the resume. So stuffed that it hardly fits on the page. 18 times All-Star, tied with Kobe for second most all-time. 18-time All-NBA, most all-time, 13 of which were first team. That's also the most all-time. He was also top 3 in MVP voting 11 times, 4 of which he won. And he's also been All-Defense 6 times, a 4-time champ, a 4-time Finals MVP, as well as a myriad of other awards and accolades. Whew, that is a lot of achievements. But going back, LeBron was always hailed as a potential all-time great player, even back when he was in high school in Ohio. The fact that he was drafted number 1 by his home state team, the Cleveland Cavaliers, seemed like destiny. Like Duncan, LeBron hit the ground running in the NBA. Despite only being 19 years old in his rookie season, he was already averaging over 20 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists per game. Suffice it to say, he won Rookie of the Year, and since then has been an All-Star and All-NBA every single year since. 2006 was his first foray into the postseason, in which he led the Cavs to the second round. Then in 2007, he made it all the way to the NBA Finals, where the Cavs were soundly swept by the Spurs. That was the furthest LeBron would make it into the playoffs during his first stint with Cleveland, but considering the team that he was surrounded with at the time, it's honestly an incredible achievement. Duncan and Kobe had the distinct advantage early in their careers of being a part of incredible organizations with Hall of Fame coaches and Hall of Fame teammates. LeBron, on the other hand, did not. Eventually, after 7 seasons of frustrating results with the Cavs, LeBron infamously, quote, took his talents to South Beach. The decision looms large in LeBron's history as his biggest PR blunder, which, if you think about it, is actually pretty impressive that over the course of 20 years, under the microscope as one of the biggest stars in all of sports, the worst thing he ever did was an interview about changing teams. Anyways, as we already touched on at various times now, the Heatles from 2011 to 2014 with LeBron, Wade, and Bosh were overall perhaps a bit of a disappointment. But all things considered, they still got to the finals 4 consecutive times and won 2. And LeBron, of course, won finals MVP for both, so it could have been worse. LeBron then returned to Cleveland, where he formed a new super team with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love. As was the case in Miami, LeBron stayed for 4 years, making the finals again 4 consecutive times. If you're keeping track, that's now 8 consecutive trips to the finals for LeBron. They were up against the all-time great Warriors dynasty all 4 times, so the fact that they even won one of those titles is impressive in and of itself. Then, in 2018, LeBron once again moved teams, this time moving west to the Los Angeles Lakers. Despite missing the playoffs his first year in LA, the team acquired Anthony Davis in 2019 and immediately made it back to the finals in the Orlando bubble. LeBron proceeded to carry his team once again, this time aged 35, to glory, averaging nearly 30 points per game in the finals and earning his 4th ring and 4th finals MVP. Since 2020, the Lakers have struggled, but LeBron individually continues to defy Father Time. Even more than Tim Duncan, LeBron has sustained an insane level of production, especially offensively, well into his 30s. He nearly led the league in scoring at age 37, averaging over 30 points per game last season, for crying out loud. On the court, throughout his career, LeBron's unique blend of strength, size, athleticism, playmaking, scoring, defense, basketball IQ, basically anything you could ask for from a player on a court, LeBron can do it, and do it very well. He's known for his constant improvement, always returning from the offseason with a new move or a new trick up his sleeve. And he's also renowned for his focus on health and conditioning, supposedly spending up to $1 million a year on maintaining his body. LeBron, as any great player does, will also always have his detractors, his critics, his haters, who at times seem willfully ignorant of his greatness. They will point to his playoff failures, as if winning 4 titles in 10 trips to the finals is not an incredible achievement. They will point to Jordan's perfect record in the finals, going 6 for 6, while conveniently leaving out the part where he didn't even make the finals in his first 6 seasons, or the 2 where he was playing baseball, or the 3 where he was retired from age 35 to 37, or the 2 when he was with the Wizards. Again, I don't mean to denigrate Jordan or litigate who's the GOAT. I would personally still lean towards MJ, but nonetheless, it's worth hammering home that LeBron is simply so great that his detractors resort to picking at his faults, as few as they are, rather than simply marveling at his achievements. But instead of letting the detractors get him down, LeBron has used criticism as fuel. He once said, "I like criticism. It makes you strong." Alright, so that is it. Our top 20 players since MJ. At number 1, we have LeBron James. Number 2, Tim Duncan. Number 3, Kobe Bryant. Number 4, Shaquille O'Neal. 5, Kevin Durant. 6, Steph Curry. 7, Dirk Nowitzki. 8, Kevin Garnett. 9, Giannis Antetokounmpo. 10, James Harden. 11, Chris Paul. 12, Kawhi Leonard. 13, Dwayne Wade. 14, Steve Nash. 15, Dwight Howard. 16, Russell Westbrook. 17, Jason Kidd. 18, Allen Iverson. 19, Tony Parker. And 20, Nikola Jokic. So, before we close, I wanted to run through the methodology that we used to make this list, because it was really simple and straightforward, and if anybody has criticism or changes that they would like to make, they're welcome to adjust the parameters accordingly. So, as discussed, this was based solely on awards and achievements. There was no subjective player movement up or down, there were no stats, just 18 awards which were given a value, and then each player's total value was calculated, and they were then ranked from highest to lowest. So here are the achievements and their assigned values. We had 7 worth 1 point each: Rookie of the Year, Most Improved, Sixth Man of the Year, All-Star Game MVP, All-Star Selection, and All-Defense Second Team. Then, as we go on, they start to get more valuable. All-Defense First Team, 2 points. Defensive Player of the Year, 3 points. Finals Appearance in a Loss, 4 points. And All-NBA Third Team, 6 points. Then we have a jump in value to what were perceived to be the more important achievements. An NBA championship, 14 points. An All-NBA second team, 16 points. An All-NBA first team, 18 points. An MVP third place finish, 20 points. An MVP second place finish, 22 points. And then finally, the top 2 most important awards: a Finals MVP, 28 points, and an MVP award, 30 points. Again, the only subjectivity involved was the attribution of the point values. Otherwise, the totals were calculated and the list was adhered to. You could definitely make several arguments about the values attributed or the method in general, namely that it discounts the contributions of 2 types of players. 1, players like Tracy McGrady and Vince Carter, who were great, highly skilled players, but who missed out on top-level achievements through circumstances that were somewhat out of their control. This is certainly true, and if a level of subjectivity was added into the equation, players of that ilk would probably be higher on the list. But then again, you could argue that the admittedly subjective term greatness does not encompass skill level or potential. Tracy McGrady could have won a lot more had his circumstances been different. but he didn't, and that's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. The other type of player who was arguably discounted with this list is those in the vein of Manu Ginobili or Draymond Green, players who never had the statistical resumes to earn as many awards like All-NBA or All-Star nods, but who nevertheless were consistently integral parts of great teams. Once again, a level of subjectivity could be added to the list to address this issue, and it certainly seems reasonable that a player shouldn't be punished for playing alongside fellow greats who inherently suck up more of the attention and the stats. If anything, they should be rewarded for sacrificing their own stats in service of winning. But then, on the other hand, you have players who actually benefit disproportionately from the objective point system. Players like Derek Fisher or Robert Horry, who would never warrant consideration on a list like this to start with, end up scoring fairly well due solely to their championships that they get credit for. That was one of the primary adjustments that was made to the rubric, lowering the value of the championships in comparison to everything else to address that issue. So anyways, that'll do it for us today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you'd like to follow the show on social, we are at NBA Recap Pod, or you can just search YouTube or smart speakers for NBA Recap Podcast. We'll be back throughout the rest of the summer to bring you more NBA content, so until then, thanks for tuning in.